of guests coming in, so we'll get on with this. I'm just going to quickly look at, we have about 2 learning outcomes so far. So what we're looking at doing is in the events management unit, the third one today, which is basically all centered around MICE, and briefly, at least, mention the term and the terminology before. But I think this particular learning outcome, focuses on why this particular term, acronym, which has got quite over the years, has become very important part and parcel of the, travel, tourism and hospitality industry. So we're going to drill into this in a bit more detail. I've got a bit of a handout which I'm going to try and send out. I think yesterday after our session I did send the handout out, but I've uploaded that onto the Moodle, which you should see along with the presentation and the session recording.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try and obviously after this session also upload the copy of this presentation, and then the handout which I've got. It's basically a bit of a research paper which has been put together by some of the students, but it basically covers this particular topic in a bit more detail than what we will be able to do using the PowerPoint slides. So read, and obviously it's a Word document which you should be able to also pick out some relevant content specifically to the different types of elements of MICE and bring that across into your assignment submission also. Now, to that when we discuss meetings, incentives, conferences and exhibitions or events, in this case exhibitions for this particular learning outcome, in your assignment, when you start to do the learning outcome 3 tasks, it will be good if you choose a particular country or a particular event that you could actually consistently refer to while doing these tasks. And I think the reason I say this is that it will help larger and a greater understanding of the MICE as a concept, and why is it so important within the travel, tourism and hospitality sector. So let's start off with going through some of the slides which I put together. I have got these slides which I put together from a very good site that I normally refer to, which I showed you yesterday. It was called the Informa research, but it's been renamed. So it's from that research site you can pick out some presentations and some slides. The other important organization I think Anton, you would want to look at would be something called CABI, CABI. CABI is an organization, I think, somewhere based in the Caribbean, and they basically, are a organization which does a lot of research, but essentially a charity. But they have a very material on travel, tourism, and hospitality in particular, in relation to, I would say the Caribbean, or basically the tourism around that. So this is a good site for you to look at, and I think some of the some of the presentations that I look at over the years I've kind of picked out a few slides from this place also. So they've got some good slides and good presentations which you can look out in the case of tourism, but we tend to focus on very detailed aspects of tourism. And this is one site. There is an open book library site which I refer to. And the reason I'm showing these resources is that when you start doing the assignment, when events management requires a lot of creativity, you're actually quite lively. This topic is quite lively, and it has that ability or gives you that flexibility to essentially bring across a lot of findings that you want to bring into the assignment by picking up, say, for example, a destination like Maldives or Ireland, for example. In the UK, we pick out a lot of destinations around the Spanish islands, the Canary Islands. We look at Mallorca, for example. A lot of places which are predominantly all dependent on tourist economies. And that is why it will be good if you pick out a particular example and kind of follow it through, in the assignment when you do this particular unit, which is events. So I am going to try and upload some of these resources or links to these sites, which I end up using to get some of the presentations and slides that I create. So it will be a good reading if you want to look at at some stage, from developing a bit more knowledge into how tourism is shaping different parts of the world. So, Far East is quite different, Middle East is quite different, Europe is quite different, and also, Americas and, the Caribbean is quite different as well. So, lots of places from which I borrow and look at the material. So, obviously, some of the presentations that we have looked at, are coming across from, really renowned and recommended authors, which the OTHM recommends in terms of books. But I think in general, this is a good site for you to look at. This is one of the presentations I looked at from Cabby, which basically is about visitor attractions. It's not entirely related to, very focused on, what you call events management. But within events management, there is a section which looks at how some countries which are totally dependent on tourism look at working on attracting tourists, to that location, because the whole economy is dependent on that. So there are some bits that I have borrowed from different places, but the idea is to keep the current, the content current and up to date when you look at this sector, because this sector is very evolving and there are changes happening on a daily basis, weekly basis within this particular industry. So let's look at some of the slides that I put together, for understanding this learning outcome, which is MICE. Now, I've started off not with a definition, but with a bit of a kind of a structure, just to say how you see MICE within when we talk about the concept, incentive travel, conferences, and exhibitions. How does it work actually? Now, this is a very, very large industry within the travel and tourism sector. So if we say the travel and tourism sector is $1.7 trillion in terms of turnover, this sector particularly, I think, roughly contributes about 300 to 350 billion US dollars annually to the travel, tourism, and hospitality sector. And MICE as a concept has started to now play into all the three different terms. So which we discussed in the first learning outcome was, things like tourism, why is it slightly different from hospitality, and why, they kind of dip into events management as a initiator to draw traffic or, more tourists or visitors in. So from that point of view, when we look at MICE, this is a very big revenue contributor. One or two slides we cover, but this chart actually shows here that if you are an attendee, that means if you are going to be attending any of the events under MICE, for example, meetings, conferences, exhibitions, whatever, or incentives. When I say incentive, this is a term that we will define in the subsequent slide, which talks about incentive travel. People work in an organization and they are given they meet certain targets, or they are able to, for example, look at achieving certain goals and objectives which are laid down. Then sometimes organizations basically giving them some incentives, and these incentives kind of tend to be foreign travel. So that is why it is called incentives. But yes, it could be different forms, but one of the most important form of incentives which employees end up getting is foreign travel. So if you look at this as a chart in terms of MICE, it basically says attendees which are making use of this format would use it for business travel. The activities that they will get involved will be 4 different types. Either they will get into meeting, travel for incentives, they'll participate in a convention, or be exhibiting or participating in an exhibition, and that tends to be the activity. Now, the industry is tourism and hospitality. So what we look at from here is that this concept goes across into contributing in terms of driving revenue both towards tourism as well as the hospitality. And the reason why I look at starting off with this is that if you imagine yourself as a business traveler and you say that you're going to visit a particular city, but sometimes they ask you in questionnaires or surveys, are you traveling for personal or professional reasons or business reasons? And you end up ticking mark everything on the survey. Okay, I've come in as I'm in primarily for business, but I've budgeted a day or so for me to be able to go across and do a bit of sightseeing as well. So when you look at the objectives which kind of go across all the three, personal, leisure, and business, you tend to then have or be seen as a contributor towards driving revenues, employability, anything which basically goes into the local economy in terms of, driving growth. So this kind of, let's put it this way, a structure shows how a simple person traveling for leisure or business purposes can actually go in and participate in any of these 4 different types of activities, but still end up contributing or driving revenues towards tourism and hospitality sector. Now, if I have to get into how do we describe MICE, the first thing that we will look at is, let's look at a definition and how this term came about. So, meeting, incentive, conferences and exhibition, MICE in short, is a type of tourism activity which involves larger groups. That means if you are traveling individually or with a family of 4 or 5 or, your close near dear ones, you would not be classified as traveling for, MICE or, going out for an activity which is related to this. But yes, when you go out in large groups, a company might be sending, say, I took an example of the Consumer Electronics Forum, which happens, in the US, in Las Vegas. Then what we mentioned was the company would send maybe a group of 15, 20, 30 people to go and attend that conference. Now, some of them would be engineers, some of them would be marketers, some of them would be salespeople, some of them would be, in products and different types, but they're going as a large group. And that is why they would constitute, going in and participating in something like MICE. These kind of events or exhibitions are put together in advance, and they have a very particular purpose. So when you look at, I mentioned yesterday of the Mobile World Congress, some of the events which I've been to, to be honest, in terms of telecom and IT, from my background point of view, and that's the kind of brought these all as examples. When you look at the Consumer Electronic Forum, you look at Wireless Japan, or you look at some of the exhibitions now happening in China, wherein they're happening within the manufacturing districts like Shenzhou, which basically brings, or provides 30% of all manufactured goods. That particular, state or district in China contributes to 30% of all manufactured goods going across all over the world. These kind of events, when they happen, large exhibitions to showcase, for example, changes in technology or, a major trend which is happening, they all planned, way in advance. So that means there's a lot of planning which goes into it. The venues typically in which they are happening are very large venues. And when I say venues, these venues are what you call self-sufficient venues. That means they will have dining, wining, conference, meeting facilities, and stay and hotel facilities within those venues. And these venues then are sometimes, created at the national level from an infrastructure standpoint of view just to cater to a conference or just to cater to an exhibition. So I mentioned about that venue in East London. Conferences happen throughout the year. That venue is basically a MICE venue. That is a venue which is, if anybody or any large exhibitor is looking at participating, showcasing venues, they will exhibitions. They will basically choose that venue up, for doing that. Now, there is another venue that comes to my mind, which is NEC Birmingham. I don't know. This is something which Chelsea might be able to relate to, but this is a very large venue in Birmingham, in the UK. All year round, there are exhibitions which happen here. Loads and loads of exhibitions. I think the total capacity is about 14,000 to about 25,000 visitors can come in and participate. Up to 14,000 exhibitors can actually exhibit at any given point in time when, for example, events happen here. It has maybe 20,000 local hotels and other type of facilities around it. And this is one of the major venues in the UK where exhibitions actually happen. So this is a venue which is also termed as something called a MICE event venue, because large meetings, large conferences, large exhibitions happen here. And this is, kind of a national infrastructure, which is named after a company because I think they've sponsored it called NEC, which is a Japanese company. But, obviously it's become synonymous like, with that name. So when we look at something like this, the characteristics of defining MICE would be that these are very large venues. People participate in large groups. A lot of companies and exhibitors actually exhibit, and they are put together essentially for a particular purpose. That means they are not the usual venues wherein, say, for example, you'll have an evening with a family or a birthday party, or, for example, let's put it this way, say a special occasion. But these venues kind of involve large participation from audiences. Now, going further, what we look at is, when I mentioned this term, that some of these venues have been over the years put together as national infrastructure, because this then tends to draw business in the local economy. So going back to the example of what I mentioned earlier was, the Mobile World Congress and, say, for example, the Consumer Electronic Forum. These associations which actually hold the license to run this particular event or the large-scale exhibitions, they then negotiate with a particular city government or the federal government to say that, okay, we are going to come in and do this exhibition for a number of years, and we want this infrastructure in place. So sometimes you will see that they kind of help drive specialist or niche kind of tourism which comes into these venues because of the exhibition or participation happening from exhibitors and people visiting these venues, and they then tend to facilitate, and ask for all the infrastructure which is required to be running this kind of an event. And if you visualize, this would mean that you would have, large, for example, when I say large, a number of hotels which will have a certain capacity to be able to accommodate, visitors. You have booking facilities, you have planning, you have security facilities, you have facilities for conferencing, seminars, and also whole host of, fooding or, essentially restauranting facilities around the venue. And this then becomes, a kind of a big revenue generator for that particular city when these exhibitions or, events are held. And just to highlight, say, for example, Mobile World Congress, because I've mentioned it so many times, it's important to have a look at the venue in terms of images to give you a sense of the scale of how this happens. These are some of the pictures of the inside venue, but obviously what we look at is outside, and it allows all sorts of things to happen. And this is like a city within a city. So this is roughly about, in terms of acreage, if I talk, it's probably about 30-35 acres. You could do 70-80 kilometers of walking in a day, and you'll still not be able to see the whole venue. So this happens in a place called Fira, which is a city within the city of Barcelona. And obviously, it is a huge place. It is a very huge place. You could easily get lost. If you want to, you could easily get lost. And what tends to happen is when large companies like, Huawei, Samsung, Apple, LG, and these kind of companies, when they take up venues, they're taking up venues wherein probably they're the size of football stadiums. So that is how big some of these venues are when they do the props and other things. And I think the MWC has been happening in Barcelona for the last 7 years, and they are very close to now changing the venue. And you have typically, as you can see, up to 100,000 attendees, which attend the 4-day event. And look at the kind of boost it creates for the local economy. And this is what would be classified as, a MICE venue or a MICE-related event. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's look at some of the other benefits which these kind of events bring. Because what we are looking at doing is we need to define what is MICE. But once we define MICE, what we want to be able to look at some of the events and have an understanding of what the classification is, but also what are the benefits these kind of events bring in. Now, there are loads of benefits, but they are distinctly classified into these 6 categories. Now, some of them could be for knowledge exchange. That means when I look at Mobile World Congress, this is an event which is primarily not an event where you can come and buy things or you to shop for things, but this is more of an event which most exhibitors, when they are exhibiting, their aim is to share knowledge and obviously exchange knowledge about the key things happening within the industry. Some events could be classified as networking events. When you see large, let me give you a small example, and I think this you will be aware of. So when you are studying a university or say for example a college, what you do get to see is there's an event during the course of the year which happens, which is like an open day. Or if you have a pre-placement talk, which is where some of the employers are invited to come in and do some talks that they end up, recruiting fresh graduates from the college or the university. Now, when you look at that particular event wherein they're coming in to do pre-placement talks or, the open days could be called as networking events. But they have an educational setting. That means people, sometimes they want to join a university or a particular course. They want to go in and see the department, the facilities, meet the teachers. And the idea is you're getting to know the prospective customer, but maybe the exact or the actual sale or, you're joining in of the application and things like that are not happening. But these are very large events which universities plan. And you sometimes get to see that, maybe parents with families are invited. And you have about 3,000, 2,000 people sometimes turning up to an open day, which seems to be a large success. So a lot of UK universities do this. I think a lot of universities abroad, everywhere they do this. So this is one of the events which kind of in the education sector mimics something called or shows the characteristics of something called, a MICE event. Now, I've covered education by giving an example of an open day there, but sometimes you also look at charities doing fundraising. One of the events that I would look at that would be the London Marathon, the Manchester 15K run, which happens every year. You have 30, 40, 50,000, people coming in to participate to raise money for good causes. But because this is happening at such a large scale, that you will see that because it's a 10-kilometer run or a 15-mile run, what tends to happen is that you'll have lots of different places where people will spring up. There'll be small, there'll be contributions from the local shops and other bits which are happening. And this then tends to be again, a kind of an event wherein a lot of good cause or people are coming in to run or getting together for, for a good cause and maybe for raising funds for charity. You'll also see that some of them are classified around the, in order for them at the government level, regional level, to create a reputation for a destination. I don't know whether you recall, but I'll give you an example of the European City of the Year, which is an event which happens or a contest which happens wherein cities like Liverpool, Hull, in the UK have also been awarded the Cultural Cities of the Year in the EU for a year. Now, these events have a high profile, bidding process. And here the idea is they want to look at building reputation for that particular city in order for them to attract tourism or in order for them to attract the benefits of tourism happening to that location. And sometimes you will see some of these events, when they happen, they tend to get a lot of media coverage. Now, I won't classify the royal wedding which happened as a MICE event, but if we are to kind of fit it into that category, we can actually fit it in because of the participation of the members of public. There were 100,000 people in Windsor yesterday on the grounds of Windsor Castle. There was a lot of media coverage. The event was televised live. It also generated a lot of short-term revenue, though in different newspapers across the world, it said it was one of the most expensive weddings, 30 million or 35 million pounds, which equates to a lot of different types of money in different countries. But it generated, approximately about 1 billion pound worth of local business for the economy in that area. So it can be classified as a MICE event, but because this had a lot of media coverage around it, I would say that sometimes you will see that some economies, some countries like Ireland, for example, declared, I think, 2016, 2017 as a year of visiting Ireland. Sometimes you will see that some countries kind of in their tourist destination brochures or tourist brochures for the year, they say, okay, this is visit year Ireland or visit year this, or something like that. And the idea is to generate publicity and coverage so that it catches the imagination of a lot of people, and that can get a lot of tourists to that country all year round. So there are lots of benefits, and some of these benefits are, combined into these 6 distinct categories. And I know for sure that our neighbor, which is Ireland, Republic of Ireland, they do a lot of these promotions because the economy is primarily, one part of the economy is primarily dependent on tourism. When you look at Iceland, for example, there one side of the economy is definitely dependent on tourism. So there are lots of promotions which the tourism department, the tourism ministry, which basically looks at promoting, or getting coverage or, looking at developing reputation of cities. Then they have hot water geysers and, for which people come across for different reasons. But, that could be classified as one of the reasons why they look at this benefit. But yes, we are not looking at, it might not invite, it will attract a lot of tourists, but not in groups. So they are not really destinations for MICE first, but looking at some of the individual parameters in which we are clubbing these categories, I'm just from that aspect. Now,
Okay.
if I just go forward, sometimes what we look at is when these events are happening, or when they are planned, what we want to be able to look at is we want to detail out what are the benefits of these, what we've discussed, the 6 benefits. What we want to be able to do is elaborate on these 6 benefits. For example, when we look at knowledge exchange, what we want to be able to look at is how do we grow local knowledge. So Mobile World Congress, for example, when it happens in FIRA in Barcelona is a city which is now buzzing with technology, a lot of startups, because that exhibition, that big, large event which happens once a year, twice a year essentially, looks at providing a lot of local knowledge, contributing to the local knowledge of that city. And that is why there are also startups or startup companies which are now based in Barcelona, and that tends to contribute for knowledge expansion. So this particular slide actually looks at putting together some of the benefits and quantifying those benefits of why MICE as an event, as a whole function is put together around the travel, tourism, and hospitality industry. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, let's look at some of the differences between 2 different types. Now, when we say there are 4 different types of, let's put it this way, activities which are happening within MICE, because that's a term, but it has 4 different types of, activities which will have different audiences. They will attract, for example, or generate different kind of interest. So let's look at meeting and incentives. Now, when we look at meeting and incentives, the differences are, I've tried to put together that on a bit of a table. When we say the meetings are normally fixed, so for example, these could be meetings which are happening across the year on a say, there's a calendar for these meetings which the companies would put together, or if it's being done by associations or confederations of associations, then they would have a calendar of these meetings, and then these meetings days do not get moved across the years because they want them to be fixed and then to be visible on everybody's diaries when these kind of large meetings happen. Incentives, they vary, because if you're looking at providing an incentive to an employee primarily for, say, for example, foreign travel, or any sort of an incentive which involves foreign travel, these incentives could be monthly incentives, quarterly incentives, 6 monthly or yearly incentives. Now, in terms of meetings, some of these large meetings which happen, which could be, say, for example, an annual meeting which Microsoft puts together, which happens once a year. They invite 20,000 employees to participate. This meeting is only by invitation. They have 150,000 employees, but every year they keep inviting 20,000 different employees from different geographies, different types of their subsidiaries, and they all come in to contribute, to participate in the business planning meetings, which typically tend to happen in, say, Seattle in the US. Now, there the invitation in terms of there the attendance is primarily through the route of invitation. Now, in the case of incentive, it requires qualification. So if the company has set out an incentive plan or a policy, and here, if you are able to meet your targets, your goals, objective, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, as long as you're able to qualify, you are able to qualify for the incentive. Now, the number of participants in these meetings sometimes can be huge, because they are annual meetings. Sometimes they could be group meetings. They could be meetings which are just primarily for a particular department, and that is why sometimes you do not know the number of participants. And that's the same case in terms of incentives. So when a company puts together an incentive policy, you will see that in that policy, the idea of putting that policy by the HR and the company board is to see that more and more employees should be able to reach their targets, which will help the company reach the target, but they are not very certain in terms of how many would reach the target. So again, it is not known that how many people will be able to achieve, but the things put in place are, put in place as incentives are to motivate, keep the morale high, and to keep them boosted towards achieving those targets. Now, meetings normally will have soft targets. That means those are, if you don't meet those targets, or if you are invited and you're participating in an activity, not able to participate to the fullest maximum, then in that case, those targets are objectives. Even if they are not met, you're not kind of asked to leave the meeting or checked out of the meeting. But incentives in terms of objectives are hard. That means either you achieve or do not. So it's binary to a certain extent. That means if you achieve the target, you get the incentive. If you do not achieve, you do not get it. Now, results in the case of meetings sometimes can be vague because it's difficult to drive consensus. So when you are attending a large conference, say for example you have an annual meeting or a meeting which you are attending where it has lots of objectives. Sometimes you will feel that after the meeting, the training, the seminar that you have attended, you have not come away with a particular thought or a concrete action plan. So sometimes the results could be vague, but they are termed as meetings because the idea is that the information needs to be disseminated to one and all in terms of participants which are present. But in the case of incentives, it is easily specific, it is easy to specify, and they are quite quantifiable. That means sometimes you will see incentive schemes which are put together. They're put together when they reach, say, 100%, 110%, 125%, and then 150% or over. So that means if you're achieving 110, the targets and the incentive schemes are quite specific. If you go over 150, they're easily quantifiable because there's a slab-based scheme. So sometimes you will feel that even at the scale at which these events happen, they can still have clearly, distinguishable objectives when they are put together as events. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, now let's look at three different terms which we want to be aware of. When I say that we know about MICE events, when we say that we understand what is MICE, we need to know three different terms. Now, one of the terms that I'm going to discuss is something called DMC. Now, DMC stands for Destination Management Company. Now, this is a company which kind of specializes in providing professional services, in terms of both local expertise, resources, and these are companies which are able to put together a particular concept for you when you decide to participate in a MICE or you're exhibiting in a MICE as a company, as an organization. So these are very large companies which do events management to a certain extent. I wouldn't probably say events management, but yes, they are able to pretty much project manage your participation in a particular type of event if it is to be classified under MICE. So when you look at Mobile World Congress and some of the, if I just bring that website up again, and when I look at some of these programs which are created, these are created by contractors or companies which are called DMCs. And you will, basically work, somebody in the marketing department or in the events department within the company which is participating in an event like Mobile World Congress will actually work with one of these companies to kind of deliver their vision in terms of how they would want their brand to be portrayed, the props to look like, and they basically manage everything. They will provide manpower, they will provide, volunteers, they will provide activities, tours, transportation, and they will basically manage the entire event for you, for putting it together and then storing it over the years and then reusing it if you want to reuse it or use some part of it into next year. So these are companies which are called, destination management companies. Now this term might be more relevant to companies which can provide you a service if you look at resort management events which are happening in resorts. So they are able to provide, some sort of a leisure activities, some sort of activities which are related to evenings, mornings, manage the meetings, also look at, fooding and restauranting for you, and to a certain extent also provide excursions and tours, for a selected group when you hire them to do a particular event or, manage a particular event in a category called MICE. Is that okay?
Yes.
Is that understood?
Yes.
Okay, good. The second term that we look at is something called PCO, Professional Conference Organizer. Now, a PCO is basically a company slightly different from DMC, but their role is that they specialize they specialize primarily in providing the organization and management of that, event that you're participating in. So a DMC would look at getting into physical nitty-gritties of, coming up with the infrastructure, the concept, the whole start to finish. So, they'll project manage everything. But a PCO will be primarily once the prop is ready, or your, food is ready, or your exhibit is ready within then they will come in and basically manage, the running of it, or primarily, creating the events or the excitement within that for the participants and audience to be coming in and, interacting with you, networking with you. So here, a PCO company would be a company which basically then provides manpower, specialist manpower, people who are able to come in and, look at, for example, putting together a concept or an event for you once you're within your exhibit, and then manage it to drive some, let's put it this way, business objectives. So when you look at a lot of organizers which put together large stalls in these events and venues, one of the key things they hire a company like PCO would be to come in and provide volunteers which have knowledge, background, and industry expertise, are able to interact with customers, are able to kind of give the experience of demonstrating their products and services in a particular fashion. So what the company would do is they would train and provide some training to the employees or staff of the PCO company, which then will run the whole event for them. And they will only come in and look at, for example, some key people of the management will come in and probably just review that if everything is going okay or not. And a simple example that I would give here would be when you look at going to an exhibition, you sometimes look at, for example, let me put it this way, see, for example, you go across to a Vodafone showroom, or you're in an Apple store, for example. You go in and see a lot of products which are placed in the Apple store. You're wanting to take a demonstration of it. What you do get to see is that at some stage, a sales specialist would come up to you and speak to you to understand why you're looking at that product, the benefits and disadvantages, and would probably end up doing a demonstration of that product to you. So if you take that and kind of expand it to an exhibition, wherein you will have maybe a company which has, taken, let's say, a large amount of space, and in that they are basically running the event wherein the PCO company and their volunteers then do the same exercise of quickly running demonstrations and, say, for example, demonstrations of products or services to a large number of audiences which are visiting that venue.
Okay.
So that would be the example of, a professional organizer company which will provide maybe 50, 60, 70 volunteers. And these 50, 60, 70 volunteers would be giving mass demos of products of mobile phones, for example, or anything which is being exhibited to a large number of visitors going through that on a daily basis. Even if the duration of the event is 2, 3, 4 days, but they'll probably cycle through about 3, 4, 5,000 demos. As against, when you look at a store, probably the sales specialist gives about 3, 4, 5, or maybe 10 to 12 demos a day. You see the difference?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So here, what we are looking at is the people which are working within that company, and they get a hold of a contract, or the contract to manage the running operations within the particular venue. They seem to be specialists. They seem to have a background and knowledge and skills. And to a certain extent, the company, utilizing the services of a PCO, would also give training to its staff to be able to manage these events on a yearly, monthly, yearly basis. So if I pick out an example of a company, just wanting to be sure if I can probably show you that. Now, this is one company which I have used in the past, and they are a very large organization which basically act as a PCO. They are able to start from, when they come and meet you, they will be able to put together, by taking your idea, an event from scratch. So, they will primarily look at so let's put it this way, they'll come in and do a discussion with you, take that idea from the drawing board, come up with some storyboards, work on it again, and then they are able to deliver an event from, a storyboard to actual delivery in terms of stalls, venues, or, large, say for example, exhibitions. And then they are responsible for storage. They also provide people. So they are a combination of a PCO and a DMC. They are a very large company in the US. And they allow, they probably can do both the functions. But some companies like these, they specialize only in terms of event delivery, which is providing the infrastructure. But some part of that would be DMC. But when it comes to people in people's organization, that part of that delivery will be more concerned with the concept of professional conference organizers. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, good stuff. So let's look at the third term, which was incentive travel. Now, when I look at the I in MICE, this is primarily, incentives which are given out by companies to their employees as a meaning of rewards or for outstanding performance. And incentive travel is a very, very big area within lots of companies today, which are primarily, multinationals. So this is one of the major, let's put it this way, types of incentives which HR departments put together, and they work, or they have retained travel agents, or agencies, or companies which then provide them this incentive travel depending on the incentive schemes rolled out, and the different type of promotional schemes rolled out by different departments within the organization. And this is a large component of MICE, because at some stage, all companies have some sort of an incentive travel now integrated within their policies, or pay and perks, and larger level annual. So incentive travel is given to employees as a reward for outstanding performance. This is normally now a global management tool. Most HR managers are aware of it. They have to have some sort of an incentive, which is either a 3-monthly, 6-monthly, or an annual incentive. And they tend to kind of look at tying up with tourist destinations, or event organizers under MICE, so that they can then change these locations, destinations year on year, because this is something which is a regular part of their planning calendar. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, very briefly, just going into one or two other slides. Now, let's understand what is the size of this market. Some of the other characteristics. Is this a seasonal trend? Is this a long-term trend? How does it work within the tourism and hospitality sector? So I've answered some of the questions here by this slide. This is a slightly old estimate that, when we look at this as a sector, as per 2007 and Informa research, this figure is now $300 billion a year. Now, this industry is showing a lot of increase, so they are increasing year on year, and obviously a lot of companies are jumping into the bandwagon of, kind of only providing services related to MICE, because this is a revenue generator industry within the segment, and also there are handsome profits in this particular segment, and this is a long-term business. So once you get on the line, which participates in a particular type of exhibition or type of event at the MICE, they are with you as long as you are able to deliver the services and they find value in your services. So when you inherit clients like these, you will typically retain them for a number of years to come, and that is where you are seeing a substantial increase in terms of companies which are relating or providing services directly related to MICE or MICE type of events.
Okay.
Now, just to clarify here, obviously I put some definitions in, but what we want to look at under the differences, when we look at what are the various type of organizers which kind of provide these events, there are 4 different types, and what we look at is, there is one which is associations. So you see a lot of different types of associations which have become, associations over the years, is because they started off as a small initiative, but as the events have become regular, attendees have become regular, they have taken the form of associations. Now the other is convention centers. Now, there is one convention center which I can think of, which, because there are four key players, as I put it this way, when we look at MICE. Now, the four key players are four different types of associations or different types of, organizations which manage the MICE events across the globe. Now, one is associations, which are being created at the national, international level, and they have some recognition, and these associations have a play and a strategic intent in creating policy and also the type of events which happen across the globe. The second is the places where these events sometimes happen. These are called conventional centers. The third is professional congress organizers. That means there are some regional associations which have got made under the international associations, and these regional associations or organizers essentially direct the policy and what kind of events can actually happen under that particular umbrella. And the last one is called destination management companies, which are DMCs, and these companies also have a very strategic role because they kind of play into the policy and also the policy development at both regional, local and international level. So we need to be able to understand how these four different parameters or four different kind of organizations actually, and the parameters they contribute as external influences, influence the MICE sector. Now, what are associations, if I have to name here, I would probably name, World Congress as one of the professional congress associations which happen within European, region. If I have to give you an example of a convention center, I've got Moscone Center here, which is based in San Francisco in California. And this is a media center where lots of different types of conferences happen. And this has an iconic value in terms of the different conferences or conventions happening within the center. Now, the association would be Wireless Japan. This is an international association which influences development of policy, infrastructure, exhibitions, events which happen around the wireless industry and how it's developing in the future. And this management companies is one which I've given you an example is a company like Pico. So we need to be able to differentiate the role and the the influence they have within this sector that we are discussing, MICE, and we need to understand them carefully by looking at an example. So when we look at Moscone Center, this is basically under it's a very large convention center. This has a capacity of about, I think, 15,000, and it's under a solid roof. So this is a particular center which we need to understand, which basically is a large convention center in the world, wherein a lot of iconic conferences or conventions happen. Product launches, for example, happen. If I have to simplify it. So when you look at Samsung launching the Galaxy S8 or S9, or you look at the Apple phone, and some of the big announcements which have come out, Moscone Center is associated with that. Obviously, Apple's got its now own, headquarters, which is the Apple Dome in California, San Diego, California. But before that, I think up until 2016, they used to do all their major product event launches or major announcements happening in this place in Moscone Center. So this is what I would want you to understand primarily from a point of view of understanding the differences between the different elements of MICE and what are the four different types of classifications which can happen and their influence in doing or creating these events across the globe for the industry. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Put some definitions in which primarily I would probably go through when I send this presentation over to you. Nothing different, but it defines what are conventions because we've defined meetings, events, but looking at the definition of conventions, wherein it's a huge gathering of people under one roof for various reasons, networking, information, knowledge sharing, which is the 6 broad categories which I've looked at. Now, there are some importance, there is a very significant importance of the MICE sector, which I want to just briefly discuss. I put together 4 slides, but I just want to go through some of the bullet points only, because some of them are quite self-explanatory, keeping in mind the discussion that we've done so far. Now, one of the key things, looking at the figures or the revenue which MICE generates, it is coming turn out to be like event management is another sector within the tourism and hospitality industry. Similarly, MICE is a very resilient sector. That means it is not backing down even during recession. There are people which are still traveling, businesses still do conferences and exhibitions and things like that. So this is a sector which is not showing any signs of any slowdown. So that is why it is important as a concept or as an integral part of the industry. Now this brings in tourism or visitors to a location not from a tourism aspect but from the aspects of the 6 broad categories that we look at, like knowledge sharing, education, those kind of aspects, and it brings in a steady source of income across if the activity or the exhibition has become a calendar event. Like in NEC Birmingham, there are lots of events which happen throughout the year. I think there is always an event happening at NEC throughout the year whenever you go. There are very few lean periods in which the events do not happen, but across the month, you will see that there are lots of events happening in that venue. So it brings in a lot of visitors, which are coming in for a specific purpose for 3, 4, 5 days a week, but predominantly this brings in a lot of income and visitors which are coming in for those 6 broad categories that we discussed earlier. Now, particular category is not susceptible to price fluctuations or seasonality. Sometimes you will see that during winters in the UK, the prices of hotels and the B&Bs actually drops 30-40% because during the summer everybody wants to visit, but during the winters, the rainy season or the autumn, there are not many visitors coming into the UK. Actually, people are going out. So some of the events when we look at from a hotel's point of view, they are kind of subject to seasonality and fluctuations. But in the case of MICE, this concept is not susceptible to this, or it is less susceptible. Now, whenever these kind of events happen, or the category MICE, happens, or is planned, you will see the total occupancies go up, and obviously these events are planned in conjunction with the hotel or the hotel, groups to ensure that when they have lean periods in terms of tourists, visitors attraction, they tend to plan these events at that point in time, which kind of plugs in the gaps between these occupancies and obviously bringing in more visitors. Now, some of these venues, conferences, or classify them as events, they have all destinations on their own. So when we look at FIRA Barcelona, or when we look at where the consumer electronics or large events happen, they have become tourist attractions within themselves. Even if the event is not happening, people will still go up to that place to primarily see a glimpse of what kind of exhibition or what kind of happening within that location. So Moscow Center is one such venue where you visit the gallery. You'll probably go in and see how the events happen. You'll probably go in for the memorabilia, and sometimes you will see that this then gets into normal tourist attractions as well within that particular city or in that tourist destination. Just spend 3 times more on an average in some tourist. So here, if I give you an example of a casino, so for example, when you look at Las Vegas, destinations take more money than probably what are very popular, because they keep you engaged within the venue, wherein you are able to, they are giving you multiple opportunities to be able to take the money from you. You spend more because you're not just paying for lodging, but you're spending into, maybe the visitor side of things, attraction, memorabilia, restaurant, entertainment, networking, and those kind of other things. More fruitful for the hospitality and tourism industry. And then the other things that would be that in order for these events to be that sometimes they need massive influx of manpower in terms of employment, even for short bursts. Happening for 4 days, you will see there's a lot of demand for hostesses in particular, or people who are skilled in terms of technical skills, and they get shorter short-term employment. It's an employment opportunity for them for a period of a month, but after the event is over, the employment opportunities disappear. There's a certain, kind of for the local venues or the local shops in that area, but once the event is over, that spike in sales actually disappears. And that is also closely related to the taxes government can sometimes collect, because it would involve people traveling, and there will be an influx, that you have to apply to the visa or the embassy, maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks applications that they end up receiving during that period. Large events, you will tend to see that sometimes you have to apply 4 or 5 weeks in advance to require a visa. And that tends to be, say, an example of how the government or that actually get increased tax collections, from such large events.
Yeah.
Now, any questions on this so far?
No, I haven't.
Is the topic that we've covered today clear?
Yes.
So far, yeah.
Okay, that's great. So I think what I'm going to do is, and then I'm going to send you that handout which I mentioned, which is primarily about research, which and give you some more reading into this particular sector, which is nice. And then we'll catch up next week, on Saturday again to cover the core part of the learning outcome, and kind of then bring this unit to an end. But we'll also do a bit of a discussion on the assignment in the next.